Okay, my name is Angelo Wilson. My occupation was city plumber. I'm a retired city plumber. Worked for DPW. What else do you want to know?
And then where you're from.
Oh, where I'm from, I was born in Kentucky, Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I'm an Army brat, so I'm from all over.
And then when did you come to San Francisco?
We came to San Francisco in '64, and we moved first to Glen Park for like 6 months, and then we got quarters on the Presidio in Waring housing area, right next to Baker Beach. Then Waring housing area was provided housing for military folks, and it didn't cost me. It basically cost what your stipend was, what the military gave you. So they had a lot of poor kids over there. Not poor, but military kids, basically poor. And then you were sent to schools. It depended on the census of the school in the city. If the census was down, they'd get a busload of kids and send them over to that school. So, yeah, the Army had contracts with the city schools. Okay, we lived in the Presidio. My father got stationed in Oakland. We went over to Oakland for 6 months and couldn't stand it because they were trying to burn the city down. It was in '67, they were rioting over there. And then we came back to San Francisco, and then I lived on Parsons Street right above the Haight. In '67, I think it was end of '67 and '68. So we had as our neighbors Country Joe and the Fish, Jefferson Starship, our Star Airplane, Jefferson our Airplane back then. And we had Jules Broussard practicing his saxophone across the street. And it was basically a rich hippie area. And people that went to USF. Not really, they really kind of lived in the dorms then. They didn't have to live outside. So it was old St. Ignatius. It used to be until they closed it down, I think '68, and built it over on next to Giannini. So it was affordable. That was our living situation until we moved on, like 8 blocks away down on Haight Street, and was it 75? So in '67, we moved to Parsons Street, and '74, '75, we moved down to Hayes Street, Hayes and Central. When my parents first went looking for housing in the city, they went to Green and Kaufman on Geary Street, and they were told that they didn't, not that Green and Kaufman, I don't think it was the statement that Green and Kaufman didn't sell to black people, but they're saying that if you want to buy in the Richmond, they didn't sell to black people. You weren't going to find the houses that you want, though there were some black families there. But I think most of those families bought the buildings because they knew the people, or somehow, nobody wanted the building. And then, so it was basically 10 years later that they ended up buying. At that time, if you had the money to buy in a neighborhood, you were not allowed to buy in the neighborhood. My mother said, Presidio Gate, those houses were $45,000 and $50,000 or something along that line, along the Presidio wall or whatever. Maybe they're making the story up, but you could have all the money in the world, but you weren't going to get it. The easiest thing to do was go in a neighborhood that still was black, and then you could buy. And my parents, they were smart enough to know that, they'd have the renters pay for their building, so they bought They bought 3 flats. It was 3 flats divided up into 5 units. And that's where we moved on Hay Street. And then 2 years later, they bought another house, a house over. But that was not unusual, that working people could buy things in the city then. I have friends that lived in public housing. The father became a plumber. He bought a home. He bought a vacation home in Clear Lake. He bought a vacation home in Bodega, and he had a house in South City. So that was not beyond the imaginings of working class people to have more than one home, you know. My current housing situation, I'm living in a building my mother left to me. I actually left me to live in and left to my kids.
And so, if you didn't have that, how difficult would it be to live in San Francisco?
I wouldn't be living here. I wouldn't be able to afford it. I'd probably live in a studio or something, you know, 400 square foot studio or something, and I'd probably be paying $1,800 or $1,500 or more than that. But no, it's not on the horizon. It wouldn't be on my horizon. I'd be moving to someplace else.
And is that because you're kind of like on a fixed income and?
Well, I am on a thing. Once I retired, I'm on a fixed income, and also, you know, yeah, I'm on a fixed income. And if you don't have money, you're on a fixed income.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my sister moved to Georgia. My mother moved back to Georgia because she wanted to be with her relatives, basically. My sister, because her husband retired from the post office, it wasn't affordable for her to live in the city. Yeah, but I remember when single mothers with their children could afford to keep a roof over their head, and they would be probably a receptionist at in fact, I know somebody who was a receptionist at a dentist's office and had 3 sons, and she was able to provide housing for them and, you know, a decent place to live. I know another woman who had 2 boys and a daughter, and yeah, she was the only one working, and she was able to provide housing for her kids. They were able to live in the Richmond, which is, who can afford to live there? You know, you got 3 and 4 people living to put the money together to stay in a flat. Yeah, development, thank you. Well, my daughter, one of my daughters is a fireman. She can't afford to live away from home. She lives in the flat above me that we inherited. She's trying to get into a program where she can maybe put down on a house that's provided by the city. But, you know, even if you do get in the program, if your choices are in the million, over $1 million or somewhere around $1 million, how do you pay $10,000 a year in property tax and pay insurance and then pay your utilities? And yeah, you can be frugal and you can really be willful and want to do it, but it makes it difficult on you. Yeah, it used to be affordable.
And can any of your kids, so she can't afford, but can any of your kids afford the city, do you think, or?
Not to buy a home, you know, if that's the goal. But even to, it's even more expensive to rent than it is to buy, it seems. So I don't think there are very many options, you know, for them to dream on. Could I tell you about San Francisco? San Francisco used to be a city everybody dreamt of. It was like, you know, if they, you know, in myth, it was the Golden Mountain or whatever. But for people who came from the South, it was a place, there were stories told about San Francisco that said if you walk down the street and you saw a quarter, you just kicked it out of your way, because if you kept walking, you could pick up a silver dollar. And that was the Bay Area. That was what you were going into. The city was full of union. It was a union shop. Just about every job in the city was a union job. Everybody could make a decent living and live in the city. And when development started in the city, it moved everybody out. They commodified housing. They wanted to get the last penny they could out of real estate. And that forced everybody to move. And now you have people that aren't really committed. They're here for the opportunity. As long as the opportunity is here, they're here. They're not really bringing their family here. They're not really building neighborhoods. They even changed the name of neighborhoods to make them attractive. You know, NOPA. What the hell is NOPA? What is SOPA? What are those things? You know, North of Penn. Give me a break. You know, it used to be working families that were around Belvedere. They were a nurse and a bus driver could afford a house around Belvedere. That used to be. Or a guy was a guard, a security guard, and his wife was a nurse. They could afford to live on Grattan. They could own a home on Grattan. And now those homes are $2 and $3 million, $4 and $5 million in some cases, and they can't afford it. And that's all due to everybody trying to pinch the maximum value out of something. And I don't see the solution in being, you know, you may call it affordable housing. How can housing be affordable if it costs $500,000 to $700,000 a unit to build? Nobody's going to rent cheaply something they put $750,000 in to anybody. So they're looking for their return, which means that still you're going to have middle class, not even middle class, you're going to have upper middle class people coming in, or fools who don't mind throwing away their money, coming into the city to live. Well, like I said, it was a stipend we lived on in the Presidio. You know, it was the military stipend. You get housing, okay? And I think you have to make a commitment to the people that work here, that run the city. I mean, not necessarily run the city, but that do labor here, that you provide housing for them. And you have to make policies that attract, that are catered to working people, not to investors. I think because, you know, everybody's just dizzy over the amount that you have to pay for a house and their wonderful investments and all this stuff. And that's just what they are, investments. They're not homes. City has to make a policy of providing homes for people, not just secured investments for people that have more money than they know what to do with. The bus may or may not stay there. It's the 21 Hayes, and it was a convenient route for a lot of people, and they closed it down for 2 years, and then people stopped taking it, and it hasn't gained back its ridership. And downtown, there's nothing in downtown that people want to go to see. You know, they've given it away to developers, and they've priced themselves out of an existence. You know, yeah, I mean, yeah, in a livable neighborhood, you got good transportation. You have decent schools that aren't lotteried out, where you have, you know, everybody who goes into the lottery here in San Francisco now, they seem to think they're all crows, and each of their little crows is blacker than the other one. They always think my crow is prettier. So they're invested in their kid, not in the system necessarily. So you got to have people that are invested in the school system. You got to have people that want to send their kids to schools. You got to have an education system that's going to provide them a good education. You gotta open back up the museums and the enrichments that kids can get, so people want to keep them in public, in the public education system. Museums were free. Everything was free. I used to go in the summer. I used to go to the museum. I actually became friends with some of the paintings in the museum. I was in love with some of the paintings. There was this El Greco painting. Christ was hanging on I just fell in love with it. It was my friend. I think you could put up $10 or $5 and go take classes at the Academy of Sciences. You had that. You could walk in Japanese tea garden, you know. It was a wonderful place. And now everything is commodified, you know. I know things cost money to run, but $12 billion for a city that's only 47 square miles, something's wrong. Something's wrong. There's a lot of money slipping between the cracks. It's going places that, you know, it can't be going to workers because they can't afford to live in this city. So it has to be going someplace. No, I remember Pacific Heights used to be paved. The streets in Pacific Heights were paved 3 times to the 1. They'd pave it 3 times, make sure that whoever lived in Pacific Heights never bumped, never had to rattle themselves. And then we had a bus line on our street. It seemed, let me take that back. It seemed like they were paved 3 times to our 1 because the bus was constantly on our road and tearing it up. You know, it was just uneven, and you could feel the bus go by and bump your house. So I think the commercial areas need to be taken care of, where, you know, and I think if you've got $15 million mansion, you can afford to pave your own street if you want it done. You know, they need to put schools in rich districts so the kid has an idea of what wealth is and what the world is, not to make them feel bad or want to accomplish that, but to know that there's another world. When I went to school at Roosevelt, I had friends in Pacific Heights, Presidio Heights. I got to see what the other half lived like, and they got to see how I lived, and I think it made for a better education. I think you tax speculators. I think people that don't have any, that are just consider housing as investments. I know everybody has a right to spend their money where they want to spend their money. But if you provide housing for somebody at a decent rate, you should get special tax breaks. People that don't, they should get their behind tacked to the wall. You know, some guy who's gonna, he's gonna buy up something in the Mission, tear it down, put up apartment buildings, charge $5,500 a month. And if you're looking to provide housing, you're not doing it. That's not housing. That's an investment. You're helping an investor get along, you know. But you know, and also people that buy houses and put in grandma units, I don't think that's a solution either, because certain neighborhoods have characters. You know, I think in the Sunset you have characters. Never used to be any. You look at the Presidio, what happened. All of a sudden they've rented it out. There were never any cars. Military people couldn't afford cars. Now there's 4, houses have 3 cars. They send their kids to private schools. You know, they bicycle home and park 3 cars on the street. That's an abomination. And the people that can best afford to live on the economy that can live out in the city are the ones getting the housing in Presidio. They tore down a third of where he housed an area, I think it was, or 20% or something like that, because they didn't want to see poor people at the gates of Seacliff. It's Pacific Heights. It used to be Pacific Heights lower and upper. Lower Pacific Heights was all black. It was a black area until developers came in and squeezed people out and drove the prices of everything up. You know, development in the city planners eliminated Lower Pacific Heights. They dug up the Fillmore district and left it empty for 8 and 10 years. They promised the people a way back to the city. They're going to build these wonderful places to live in, and they come back to the city. They built wonderful places. They started construction 8 years later, and by then they had scattered everybody from the neighborhood out. And when that generation was gone, so they never came back. Now they're building housing for, I don't know who they're building housing for. I'm just trying to figure out how you can have a housing plan, like I said, that costs $500,000 or $700,000 a unit and provide it for anybody. I don't give a damn what part of the city you put it in. You know, you have to make a commitment. You got to say either cheaper housing, unit housing, you know, building block housing, something, and provide it for people. And also, you have to get away with the concept of we're going to provide housing for every single person that's out there. And I'm talking single. It used to be a city of families. You got to make a commitment to draw back families. Your population would be the same, but I think it's more affordable when you have a family in a unit. I mean, if you make a commitment to families, because everybody I knew lived in an apartment way back when. Nobody lived in a house. Nobody had more than one car. If they had that, they used buses. We're building a city that's catering to prosperity, not to workers. You know, I mean, you want your workers to be prosperous, yeah. But that should be your focus. The majority of voters, people that work, people that are invested in the city and that aren't going to move on. You know, my son is 5th generation San Franciscan. His grandparents came over here in 1848 on his mother's side. And I'm here trying to make a stand for him, you know, and I want to see a city full of people, a variety of people, a variety of, you know, you want to call it ethnicities and what do you call it, finances are financially different. I want to poor next to rich, you know. Sky's the limit can't be the policy. Not if the city's going to survive. I think my father was a janitor. He was a sergeant. He was on the Presidio. He was a military man by day, and he was a janitor at night. I used to go with him and help clean buildings at night on the Presidio. So, and though I don't expect everybody to work 16 hours a day to advance themselves in the city, but You're saying who?
Yeah, what it could be age group, ethnicity, or
Okay, my wife's a teacher. My former wife is a teacher. I think you want you want teachers, you want to provide a stable environment for people that are going to teach your kids. You want health care workers to be able to afford to live here. You want all your service workers that work in the city, that service the city, to be able to afford to live here. If rich people are only 2% or 1% or 5% of the population, then the other percentage should be people that work for a living. I mean, I think wealth is overrepresented here. An equitable distribution. What's set in place is what seems insurmountable. You have wealthy people that they're not getting off their ass to move out, and they're not going to approve development in their community, and it's going to change the nature of the neighborhoods that everybody admires. Everybody is in love with Pacific Heights. Everybody is in love with Jordan Park. Those are parts of the city oh yeah, if I ever get money, I want to live there too. And you don't want to change the nature of those places. But you're saying you're going to have to double. You got to disincentivize people just wanting money. That's what it is. That's not a political thing. It's a social engineering of thought that's going to change it. It's not going to be, like I say, you can build all the houses you want. They're still going to be expensive. They're not going to be affordable for the people that need it. Like I said, I used to remember, I knew my friends had single mothers that worked at low-paying jobs that actually provided housing for the kids in the city. And you've got developers in charge of the city that are looking to maximize their profit. If you can address that and you can change their values from money to people, you'll have a different city. You'll have housing for people. A bunch of the old property owners are willing, most of the people I know that own property, the old folks, they're willing to rent to people that are going to be decent to them, that are going to be decent tenants. But then you have a new breed of tenant that comes in. That's my rent-controlled apartment. You can't do that to me, which takes that part of the market offline. Nobody wants to rent to shiesty tenants. And if they do rent to shiesty tenants, you want to get as much as you can because you never know when you're going to get bitten. So you have to change the adversarial nature of landlord and tenant. I think that's part of the solution. I think you disincentivize people from owning huge amounts of real estate, or that real estate is an investment. You have to look at it as a home for people, and that is valued as well as whatever profit you can make. So there's a whole lot of mindset that has to be changed, and you can't burden. Maybe you can. You can stick it to the people that are now rich and own homes and density low places in the city. Because, let's face it, they prevented a lot of people from developing over the years. And yeah, that's why they do have the nature. I mean, Pacific Heights has this nature, when they want to open up newcomer school to foreign students and troubled kids, they don't want people out of the neighborhood or going to schools that are empty. The politicians themselves in the city are or a block on housing. Maybe you need to get rid of some politicians.
So please correct me if I'm not understanding you. So it seems that you're saying that
The statements don't jive. I know. I mean, I like old neighborhoods. You know, I like old neighborhoods, and I want to see some kind of development in those neighborhoods. And I think rich people or people in low density areas have to trust that people that are here for jobs, that want to raise their kids, they want a decent neighborhood too, and they're not going to butcher their neighborhoods. I think that's the way the city has been run. I think they've opened the barn, they've opened the gates to developers, and that's gonna skew the way the city goes. So they're going to develop in the cheapest areas they can to maximize their profit. And if you commodify housing, it becomes whatever you can get out of it. And the easiest way to make a profit is find the cheapest place to build, which is Hunters Point, which is the Mission, you know, is the cheapest place to build and maximize your profit, which runs everybody out of the cheaper neighborhoods. When you ask that question, is my valuation me considering, oh, I don't give a damn about Geneva. It's a windy, empty place. Just build out there. You know, Geneva Avenue, you could develop the hell out of that. And I'm sure that landlords out there will be really happy. They just make sure the buses go out there. And yeah, there's parts out of Mission that need some density, but you also need density in Pacific Heights. You know, why do you want to run a bus 4 miles out to the edge of the city when all you have to do is make a walking path or a bicycle path to downtown from Pacific Heights? But then you're contending with people's dreams. You know, it's amazing how San Franciscans or just people in general, will fight for the right of people that are screwing them to have the right to screw them. Because someday they're going to be a billionaire. That someday, if they save enough money, they're going to live in Pacific Heights. It's bull. It's out of reach. It's gone. If I hit the lottery, maybe. But I'm not going to defend Daddy Warbucks' right to screw me. I'm not. And it's a beautiful neighborhood. I give it to them. They preserved. You know? And yeah, I hate to see it go, but the weird thing is development takes place on public property, always. They didn't mind taking the Presidio from us. I'll tell you the story about my mother when she got out of the car, when we had just came from France in '64, and she got out of the car and she looked around the Presidio. That's where we were going to live the first 3 years here. That's where I lived. She looked around and said, oh, this is nice. This is much too nice for poor people. That was her comment. I can remember that. I was only 5 or 6 years. I was 6 years old then. It's too nice for poor people because poor people live in concrete blocks outside of the city, and that's just where poor people live. So they don't live in the city. And then all of a sudden they hatch this plan to make San Francisco Manhattan. And San Francisco is Manhattan, and it costs like Manhattan. They had no regard for workers. Then after you've converted the city into a place for rich people, you want to say, oh, well, we want to give poor people a place to live. What the do you think where are poor people going to live after you've converted a city? Nobody is serious. This is just money spent on idle dreams. There's no place. It's 47 square miles, this city. You have all, you have San Bruno, you have South City, you have Oakland. You have to start thinking, I think, in general, in more regionally. Who's going to live where? Make sure the services are there for people that want to live there. You don't want to go out to Danville and live in an apartment building right on the BART. That's disgusting. Gets to 104 degrees out there. And they have a movie house or two and a car dealership. And then everybody else gets off BART and filters out to the apartments. That's not a city. We have a city. And people can't afford to live here. And in fact, I think the population of the city is going down. So why are we building houses? It doesn't make sense. Maybe I'm just a plumber, but I'm not a stupid plumber. Because you're talking about, oh, we want to put all these billions of dollars in developing housing and give people places if it's not affordable. Yeah, it's not affordable because you have policies that don't provide for affordability. And all you're doing is saying, okay, now we're going to build more houses, which makes the policies that were in place to elevate the cost of housing even more. It reinforces those. If you're going to build more housing, it's not going to lower the price of housing. It's just going to make it more unaffordable, the way they've gotten. Well, and the state mandates it because they want public money to reinforce policies that already exist. They want to make sure that downtown in San Francisco that's 30% empty is going to be full again. I don't give a fuck if this thing slides into the bay. I don't. I didn't want the development of the downtown anyhow.
Why is that?
What did we have when I first got here? Was 700,000 people, 150,000 people more are in the city. We have all of these office buildings, and it's only 150,000 people more from when I got here. I think maybe it was 600,000, now it's 700,000 or 800,000 maybe, not even that. So it's not commensurate. So we built all of this downtown. Nobody lives in it. All the South of Market flop houses are gone. You got people living on the street, sitting on the sidewalks. There's no attention to those folks. They don't care about poor people. It's a nonprofit racket. $1 billion a year to scrape crap off the street. And then the city pays, I don't know how much to house people that live on, that are marginal. That may or may not be from San Francisco. It doesn't make any sense. And we're paying for police to patrol empty streets downtown. This is just stupid. And then they worry about where we're going to build a house. So basically, planning is going to codify this bullshit and provide unaffordable housing. The plans work hand in hand with what's existing. If you're going to start a new game, what you do is wipe the board clean. And you say, okay, we have a density of 6 units for lot in every neighborhood. Every neighborhood.
That's what they've done.
How can you do it when one of the lots in a neighborhood is $3 million? I think it's disingenuous.
How so?
I think because it's not going to happen in neighborhoods that property value is such that it's prohibitive. You know, you could tear down if I had a place in the Richmond, a little house on a lot, big lot, that would only cost, okay, 1.2. Okay, then I could put 6 units on that. Yeah, I'd buy that and put 6 units up. Changes the nature of Richmond. But you have a house that's 4.5 million on the same size lot in the Sunset. I mean, in where is it? Presidio Heights or Pacific Heights. I'm not going to buy that. It's going to stay the same nature. So I don't know how you make it equal for everybody. I don't. I like a quiet neighborhood, though. I'd love to have a 1,000 square foot house on a lot in Pacific Heights. I'd love to have that. You know, but it's not realistic. And it's not realistic that everybody lives in 2,200 square feet, 2 cars, you know, goes away to Baja. It's kind of unrealistic, but everybody wants that lifestyle. Because they're poor. It's easy. They're poor, they're black, they're minorities. You don't give a shit about them. Why aren't we? Because that's where you push people out. I know people that were raised in the Bayview when it was, I knew a woman who was raised in the Bayview, a Chinese woman who was raised in the Bayview when it was Butchertown. The resources weren't put there. I mean, yeah, they just let polluters, they let the butchers just flush dead meat out into the story goes, they'd bait dogs with rats, terriers, and they'd go to Butchertown out by the Bayview to get the rats, because those rats were the biggest, baddest rats in the city. That's where all the remains of the butcheries, or I forget what they call it, there's actually a name for it, but that's where they flushed it out to the bay. Well, you know, first you stop trying to cater to gourmet shopping centers, or, you know, you go to Whole Food or something where it's prohibitive to buy food. I think you provide good grocery stores, you provide also maybe medical buildings, because there used to be medical buildings all over the city. I mean, there was French American, Kaiser, Mount Zion. I'm thinking about the Richmond district, though. But it was pretty, there's UC, but they weren't concentrated in just one portion of the city. I think that's a business decision on the part of the medical providers. They could have clinics that are smaller and less dense campuses. You know, I mean, you want to provide places for people to get health care. You want a place for people to educate themselves. You know, I don't mean, you know, City College is fine. If you have buses going to City College, you can have one place and consolidate. You know, I mean, you make decisions about where you want things to be consolidated, and just forget about. But you have to make it. You have to make it so people get to it. You know, you maybe put 30 bus lines to City College from every place in the city. You don't cut the bus lines because it doesn't have the people or whatever. You know, you just provide buses all over the city for people to go around back, and then there's no need for them to have the cars. You know, you can stop the planning for bus routes. I mean, for city streets. You don't design the streets for what do you call it? What's this new self-driving? Yeah, you don't design streets for autonomous vehicles. You design them for bus routes. And I think I think the idea now is autonomous vehicles. Another profit-making proposition for this. Everything the city does is to make somebody some money. It's not, they don't give a damn about people. It's obvious. Anybody's on the receiving end knows they're getting screwed. They're paying taxes for nothing. You got a university right up on the hill. You got UCSF. You have up another hill, you have USF, a medical building. You have St. Mary's, a hospital, 5 blocks down the street. You have Golden Gate Park. If you go into the Panhandle, you can walk all the way to the beach, 2.5, 3 miles, without going out of a park. I think after you get into Golden Gate Park, there are no streets. You just go. Okay? And, you know, you go across it, there's the Haight. That's what's weird about it. Everybody will invest as long as they make millions of dollars. Nobody wants to invest on a 10% margin. You know, I think you have to incentivize. I think if they build something that's huge, they make a lot of money, they pay a lot of taxes. They pay a lot, not reasonable taxes, a lot of taxes. You tax the hell out of their profits and make it, it's no incentive. And then you have different people with different ideas of how to develop a neighborhood. And these are just machinations. These are just, I know they're not practical. I know that. Yeah, what's nice about the north of Panhandle, inner Richmond, that area, Golden Gate Park is wonderful. That's wonderful. They used to have corner stores. A lot of those are closing. They used to have more churches, I think, per capita than any other place in the city. They had all kind of storefront churches. Used to. Development took over. What was important to me was education, the enrichment programs. I mean, but there was a difference for different people. I mean, when I went to Winfield Scott as a Army brat, they were integrating San Francisco back in the early 60s. And they would ship in kids from the Fillmore to Winfield Scott. Winfield Scott is now clearly Lilienthal in the Marina District. When they talked about, integration, they would ship the people from the Fillmore in to Winfield Scott, but they would go to separate classes. You'd have one side of the playground all black. The other side, because I was an Army brat, I was in the white side of the playground. So they had integration, but they didn't integrate. On the books, it was supposedly happening, but they separated the kids. And then when I went to Andrew Jackson, all the school supplies were all fucked up. Desks were all in disarray. Teachers were having breakdowns. Kids were bad, but they had lousy teachers. And then I got into a fight with somebody, and the guy put a couple of stitches in my eye. My mother said, "You're not going to school anymore." I went down the road 1.5 miles to Oregon, and they were throwing away brand new books. At Andrew Jackson, they were studying out of ragged books, and in Oregon, they were throwing away brand new books. I mean, old book. In Andrew Jackson, they were studying out of raggedy books, and when I went to Oregon, they were throwing away the same books that were brand new, never passed out, because they were changing over to new books. So resources, there's a discrepancy in resources, And I think it's been institutionalized or was, now they're saying it's not. But it's kind of late after you've ruined a school district to then say, oh, we want to change it all. You know, there's a lot of disingenuous stuff going on here. Everybody says they're doing something to change things. Planning is doing things to change things. I don't see where it's happening. You're building big buildings that cost a lot of money, and you're going to put people in those buildings with money. That's the nature of development in San Francisco. If you're committed to having families here, you have to start developments that cost a lot less, or the city's going to have to just subsidize them. Oh yeah, mixed neighborhoods. People of different finances living side by side. You know, people of different values living side by side. This Presidio for me, it was subsidized housing. The government paid for my housing. Government made sure that I got a good school. In summertime, I got out in the middle of the, early in the morning, and I played until the sun went down. That was my existence for 3 years, 2.5 years on the Presidio. I think that could be in San Francisco the same thing. In San Francisco in general. But I think because it was subsidized by the government, profit was not the motive. And people have to recognize that if they develop, that there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. That they're doing it because they want a city that has a mixture of people, rich and poor, black and white, from my perspective, But yeah, that's what they want. They also want the services for all, not just rich people who are dissatisfied with not having it their way, so they go and create their own services. They got to incent. They have to be committed to the idea of San Francisco. The San Francisco I grew up in, but nobody is. Everybody's committed to money now. That's kind of idealistic, but Fleischacker gave back. He made a pool. DeYoung Museum. There was, who was that? Flood. I don't know if Flood was a benefit. But rich people used to give back to the city because they got from the city. And you need a new class of rich people that thinks that's what they need to do. Not because it's beneficial for taxes or whatever, but they understand, and this was what was explained to me, that when they go to the nice little parties, that if you have a bunch of poor people living around you, you don't come back too much in your house. In order to, you pay insurance. Everybody pays insurance. You pay insurance, you give back to the city, because the city has granted you a wonderful life. And part of the insurance is that the people less than you want a wonderful life too.